Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty significant. It's one of the most ambitious and, let's be honest, complex social support structures out there. The National Disability Insurance Scheme, or NDIS, in Australia. We've really gone through the official documentation, the website materials, and our mission, for you listening, is basically to cut through all that information overload.
Exactly. And when you first look at the NDIS, yeah, the sheer amount of information can feel, well, overwhelming.
Okay.
But if you sort of step back, you see it's built on a clear, pretty massive national framework. It's responsible for coordinating support right across the country. And fundamentally, it connects to and helps enact Australia's disability strategy. We're talking about a real commitment to systemic change here.
That's really our goal today, to give you the operational map, so to speak. We're going to walk through the system in, I think, 3 distinct phases.
Okay.
First, that crucial participant journey, how you actually get access and how that personalized plan gets built.
The starting point.
Exactly. Second, we'll dive into the engine room, the practical mechanisms, the supports that are funded, and the necessary bureaucracy of compliance and oversight. It's got to be there.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts.
And finally, we want to look at the real-life human stories, because they really prove why all that structure actually matters in the end.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack this journey starting right at the very beginning. For someone needing support, that first hurdle is always, well, am I eligible?
Yeah.
Given the size of this scheme, the entry point must be, heavily formalized, right?
It absolutely is. I mean, the system needs that structure just to ensure fairness. The process really focuses on 2 major checks, answering, am I eligible? And then the practical steps of how to apply.
Okay.
And the critical first administrative step is submitting the access request form. Now, this form isn't just, a piece of paper. It's the formal mechanism that kicks off the entire assessment process to figure out if you meet the scheme's criteria.
Right. So once access is granted, the focus shifts, it seems, entirely to the individual. We move from that bureaucracy to personalization through the planning cycle.
Yeah.
Sounds like quite a detailed, multi-step process.
Well, it's designed to be dynamic, not static, and I think that's the key insight here.
Okay.
The plan is really intended to be a living document that changes as your life changes. It starts with participants learning how the planning process works, which is sort of the groundwork for creating your plan. But the ongoing management is just as vital. Participants need to learn how to use their plan effectively, using your plan, and the whole cycle necessitates your plan reassessment meeting.
So that reassessment meeting is like the system's crucial feedback loop.
Yeah.
It ensures the funding adapts almost immediately to major life changes. That makes a lot of sense for long-term support.
Exactly.
But what happens when decisions are made during that process that maybe a participant doesn't agree with? Dealing with a government body this big, people need clear ways to push back.
Oh, definitely. Transparency and the right to appeal are built directly into the system. If a participant feels a decision about their plan or even their eligibility was incorrect, they have the right to request a review of a decision.
Okay, good.
It acknowledges that, in any complex system, humans need a formal way to challenge things. And furthermore, because life often involves complex legal or financial stuff, the NDIS provides clear guidance on compensation and your plan.
How so?
Well, ensuring that things like legal settlements are properly integrated without jeopardizing the necessary support someone's receiving.
I see. That's important detail. And before we move on to the actual supports, we should probably recognize that one size doesn't fit all, especially for the youngest participants. The source material seemed to highlight a specialized track.
Absolutely. Yeah, the needs of very young children are just vastly different. So there is a dedicated process called the early childhood approach, which specifically caters to children younger than 9. The fundamental difference here is that this approach often focuses on early intervention and building capacity, sometimes even before a formal permanent disability diagnosis is fully established. It recognizes that early support can be truly transformative.
Okay, so we've covered the structure of access and planning. That's like the blueprint. Now let's talk about the actual construction, the things the scheme pays for. What exactly falls under supports funded by the NDIS?
Right. So the scheme funds categories that are designed explicitly to foster independence, skill development, and community participation. When you look at the funding types, 3 specific categories really highlight the scheme's breadth.
Okay, what are they?
First, we have assistive technology explained. Now, this isn't just about, say, mobility aids. This is anything from communication devices, specialized computer equipment, to quite sophisticated home modifications, all designed to remove physical or environmental barriers.
Wow, that's a huge area, especially with how fast technology changes. What about the other supports, things related to where people live?
Yeah, that brings us neatly to the second major area, home and living, which includes specific housing and living supports and services. This can cover everything from support staff within someone's home setting to specialized disability housing models.
Okay.
And the third essential category is aimed directly at economic participation, supports for finding, keeping, and changing jobs. This is about ensuring that disability doesn't automatically mean exclusion from the workforce.
Right, and here's where it gets, well, really interesting to me. Because this massive system relies on a vast regulated market to actually deliver those supports. How does the NDIS manage the logistics of potentially thousands of independent providers serving thousands of participants? That sounds like a heck of an economic balancing act.
It really is. It's a massive economic ecosystem, and it requires immense administrative infrastructure to manage it. That management relies heavily on digital interfaces. You've got the participant portal and the provider portal. So those are the operational hubs for, well, everything from billing to service booking. And on the provider side, the agency absolutely needs to ensure quality and integrity.
So the scheme doesn't just, cut checks and hope for the best. It actively structures and regulates the service market itself. What are the key checks and balances on providers, then?
Well, there's formality right from the start. Providers have to learn about becoming an NDIS provider, which involves sticking to strict provider compliance standards.
Such as?
This compliance covers necessary safety screening, quality standards, ethical behavior, things like that. Crucially, they also manage pricing arrangements. This is the NDIS acting almost like an economic regulator.
Right.
It's to prevent market gouging, ensure reasonable costs, and maintain some consistency across different parts of Australia.
So the pricing isn't just about setting a rate. It's about making sure that, say, a participant in a remote area has the same access potential as someone in Sydney or Melbourne, and that providers can't just charge wildly different rates based on where they are.
That's exactly the idea. And because the scheme is funded by the taxpayer and serves, a potentially vulnerable population, system integrity is paramount.
Makes sense.
So they detail actions for market monitoring and intervention, which means they aren't just passive observers. They'll actively step in if the market seems to be becoming dysfunctional or prices get unsustainable. This is coupled with specific mechanisms for improving integrity and preventing fraud. And they make their efforts accountable by publishing information you can review our public data and research.
It's clear that administrative engine is complex and absolutely vital, but the ultimate measure of the NDIS has to be how those guidelines and compliance checks translate into success for individuals. Let's move to segment 3 and see this whole framework in action through 3 distinct participant stories.
Yeah, these stories are really the payoff, aren't they? They show that the system structure enables unique, highly personalized goals.
Exactly. Take Peter, for instance. He's described as a proud Wickmunkin man. After a major stroke, he was hospitalized 1,000 kilometers from his remote community of Arukun.
Wow.
The structural challenge of just getting him home was immense. But the NDIS didn't just focus on, say, clinical recovery. It supported his return back on country with culturally appropriate support. That's a perfect example of how the scheme have to maintain geographical and cultural flexibility, going way beyond standard care templates.
And achieving that outcome, that cultural reconnection, required finding specialized providers who were willing and able to operate in a remote setting while still adhering to all those compliance standards we just talked about.
Right.
It really demonstrates the reach of the market they're trying to foster. Then you have Ocean Lee in Dubbo. Her goals were focused more on building career and residential independence. She leveraged her funding for job and life skills training, and it culminated in her achieving full-time work and living independently.
Ocean Lee's success there directly highlights that finding, keeping, and changing jobs category we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
It's not just about the funding itself. It's about targeted capacity building that leads to really measurable life results.
Definitely. And finally, there's Liam in Canberra. He turned a personal passion into an entrepreneurial venture. He's a writer, sci-fi and fantasy, and his NDIS supports allowed him to create a small business.
How so?
Well, self-publishing his books, drawing his own covers, using grants to fund necessary technology, and just generally furthering his creative work.
That story really shows that support can mean assistive tech, sure, but it can also mean business capacity building. It
Yeah.
kind of blurs the lines between therapeutic support and economic aspiration.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is the synthesis here. These three very different life goals, remote cultural reconnection, employment independence, and creative entrepreneurship, they all rely directly on that rigorous structure we discussed.
How do you mean?
Well, they needed a planning process that precisely identified their needs. They needed the availability of appropriate and compliant providers, and they needed to use those specific supports detailed in the scheme's funding categories and pricing rules. The structure is kind of the invisible enabler of these personal successes.
That's a great way to put it. Now, to wrap up, we should probably acknowledge that operating a machine this vast, it needs constant maintenance, right? The sources confirm the agency isn't static. They're constantly working on improving the way we work and improving the NDIS.
Yeah, continuous modernization is absolutely key for such a large scheme. And on the ground level, they ensure crucial practical details are handled, acknowledging the sheer diversity of their participants.
Like what kind of details?
Well, things like offering dedicated language interpreting services for those whose first language isn't English, providing specialized resources for families and carers, which is huge, and even proactive operational things like announcing scheduled plan systems updates. The source material actually dates the next one, specifically for November 8th and 9th, 2025.
Interesting.
This illustrates a commitment to operational transparency and, continuous iteration.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've tried to cut through the operational jargon today to show that the NDIS isn't merely a source of funding. It is a highly comprehensive, structured framework. It's governed by clear guidelines, compliance, rigorous planning steps, all designed to translate individual goals into tangible life outcomes, whether those relate to work, home, or cultural connection.
And if we connect this back to the immense organization required to manage this whole system, the need for provider compliance, the pricing oversight, the constant market monitoring, the effectiveness really hinges on clarity. And this raises, I think, an important question for you to consider. If knowledge is power in navigating such a complex system, how crucial is the persistent availability of publicly accessible administrative details, guides, and specific compliance reports, like those tracking provider performance or informing market health? How crucial is that information to maintaining both the system's integrity and ensuring the successful personalization of support for every single participant?
Yeah, the system that large is really only as good as its accountability and maybe the ease with which its information can be accessed and understood. That's probably all the time we have for this deep dive into the NDIS framework. Thank you for joining us.
Keep exploring those resources.